I mean, it is. It's a dick telegraph. Like, it's Chekhov's dick. It has to come back at the end.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I am one of your hosts, Degenerate Lions, and alongside me is my co-host, Ash Faithbirth Morrow.
Hi, y'all.
And Big D, Dick Ebert, has the night off for Roger Roper's wedding. Each week, we take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you'd like to see all the movies we have covered, will cover, want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatpod.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie takes to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. It's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV. Review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, Lovecraft Country, and Watchmen. Find all information on past episodes at shatpod.com/TV, where we also have past seasons of True Detective. Finally, to hang out with us live, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatpod.com/Twitch, and our YouTube channel, where we play video games, host watch parties, and edit this podcast live. Now, this week, we're doing something very special. We have a return commissioner who is so kind and so generous with us and gave us a gift in a genre that Ash and I both love dearly. It's Commissioner Rob F. bringing you 1997's Gattaca.
Well, and Rob wrote in and said, "Dear Shat Crew, we often hear listeners call or write in and reference how your pod has influenced them during good times, bad times, and most recently, pandemic times. The pod has been a constant for me personally throughout all of it, and I thank you. That is thanks to all past, present, and even guest hosts, no favorites here, for giving us these weekly episodes to enjoy and to escape. It's only appropriate for me to therefore give back after all this time now that you've recorded over half a decade of free entertainment for us. I'm a sucker for 80s and 90s nostalgia content, which is how I found your pod back in 2016 and have listened to every episode since, often multiple times. Movies in particular connect me viscerally to fond memories, friends, and family from the past, and most specifically to my father, whom I lost over 10 years ago, which is why I'm writing in today. My dad was truly a special person, kind, warm-hearted, charitable, and effortlessly brilliant. While he left an outsized impact on countless lives as a physician, community leader, and family patriarch, he wasn't known for having good taste in film. This has proved to be an enduring and, dare I say, eminently charming part of his persona for each and every person who knew him well. However, there were a handful of exceptions, and I'd like to commission one of those films today, Gattaca, the 1997 science fiction crime noir film starring Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, Jude Law, and Tony Shalhoub. I still recall when he recommended the film to me when I was in college. He believed the story arc of Ethan Hawke's character offered profound inspiration to a young person like me who was pursuing a path towards individual identity, a sense of belonging, and overall meaning in life. I was struck back then, as I am now, by one particular line Ethan Hawke's character delivers during the climactic scene when he literally swims against the tide, but in which he is speaking metaphorically to his brother. "You want to know how I did it? This is how I did it, Anton. I never saved anything for the swim back." Giving everything he could to everyone and everything around him, I can't think of a better way to define my father and his relentless commitment to bettering the world one day at a time. It's totally understood if the film doesn't hold up well or if you simply don't enjoy it for any number of bona fide reasons. In fact, it might even make more sense if the film doesn't receive a strong score, since it would just further demonstrate how the proverbial apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And again, that comes from Rob F.
Well, Rob, thank you again for another generous commission. And you're very fortunate that your dad saw a bit of Vincent in you, because the only person who ever told me that a movie character reminded them of me was I had a science teacher who said that William Wallace in Braveheart was basically me. And that didn't really end so well.
Why? Because of your hair?
I don't know. I didn't even have long hair back then. I had like a buzz cut because I played football.
I don't know. That's weird.
I think it was just because of my strong, rebellious nature or the Scotsman in me.
Or the skirt you wore.
Or it might have been the skirts I wore. But Rob, I'm also so glad to see that you don't take your taste in film so seriously. I love to see that. One of the things that's so critical to doing this podcast together, Ash, Big D, and I, and the reason why we get along so well is the fact that we are very opinionated, but we don't take ourselves too seriously in those opinions. Ash could diss a movie that I absolutely love. I could diss something that Big D loves. And we all understand that tastes are like assholes. Everybody has one.
Remember, Pump Up the Volume was just last week. We, put that one into action.
And thankfully, Christian Slater has an opportunity to redeem himself next week. Well, Gattaca is a 1997 science fiction film written and directed by Andrew Niccol in his feature directorial debut. It stars, as Rob said, Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, Jude Law, Lauren Dean, Ernest Borgnine, Gore Vidal, and Alan Arkin appearing in supporting roles. The film presents a future society driven by eugenics, where potential children are conceived through genetic selection to ensure they possess the best hereditary traits of their parents. The title is based on the letters G, A, T, and C, which stand for the 4 nucleobases of DNA. It was a 1997 nominee for the Academy Award for Best Art Direction and the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score. A follow-up series was in development at Showtime, but has been canceled as of 2023. Well, Ash, you have the stronger history with the film Gattaca. Let's start with your memories.
Yeah, I absolutely love sci-fi. I've shared that before. And, Rob, I have a deep connection to you here that, there, other than horror, science fiction by far is the genre that connects me most to my own father. I saw all of the sci-fi movies with him when I was growing up, and this was one of them. Here's the thing. In 1997, I loved Ethan Hawke, right? I love this svelte, young Jude Law that nobody knew really until this and Talented Mr. Ripley came out. Uma Thurman, always had adored her. So this movie hit all the things that I needed when I saw it in the late 90s. And I don't remember the first time, but this is a movie my family watched pretty regularly. And it's a movie my dad really loved. So I have very fond memories of this, but strangely non-specific memories. This is a movie I remember what it looks like. I did not remember a lot about what happened in it. So thanks, Rob, because it was good to remember that.
I'm in the same boat or rocket as you, Ash. There are 2 dystopian works of art I've tried several times to experience, and I always seem to fail. The first is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I've borrowed the book from the library. I've added it on Audible. I have it on Kindle. I just never managed to finish it. Something about that book always stymies me. And up until this recording, I had never seen Gattaca in its entirety. Somehow I would always doze off toward the end, or I would catch it on TV or something, but miss the beginning. And all I remembered, like you, just these visions of this movie was rocket ships, swimming, and Jude Law, which, by the way, not bad memories.
No.
But certainly not enough to put together an opinion of a film. Let's hit the trailer.
Genetics. What can it mean? The ability to perfect the physical and mental characteristics of every unborn child.
Of genetic engineering. To choose the genes. In the sense of society.
In the not-too-distant future, our DNA will determine everything about us. A minute drop of blood, saliva, or a single hair determines where you can work, who you should marry, what you're capable of achieving. In a society where success is determined by science, divided by the standards of perfection, one man's only chance.
How do you expect to pull this off? I don't know exactly.
Is to hide his own identity.
This is the last day that you're going to be you and I'm going to be me.
By borrowing someone else's.
Congratulations. What about the interview? That was it.
Do you think you'd be doing what you're doing if it wasn't for who you are, what you are?
I have a feeling he might be there under false pretenses, playing somebody else's hand.
They've got my picture plastered up all over the place. They'll recognize me.
They won't recognize me.
They'll recognize me.
I don't recognize you. They won't believe that one of their elite could have suckered them all this time.
They are going to find me.
But in a place where any cell from any part of your body can betray you, how do you hide? When we all shed 500 million cells a day. Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman. Welcome to Gattaca.
In the not too distant future, a genetic registry database uses biometrics to classify people created through eugenics as valids, while those conceived naturally are known as invalids. Genotype profiling is used to identify valids to qualify for professional employment, while invalids are relegated to menial jobs. Vincent Freeman was conceived naturally with a high probability of disorders and an estimated lifespan of 30.2 years. His parents used genetic selection in conceiving their second child, Anton Jr. Growing up, the two brothers often play a game of chicken by swimming out to sea as far as possible. One day, Anton loses the game and starts to drown. Vincent rescues him and soon leaves home. Ash, this rewatch of Gattaca hits us at a very interesting time, I think, in history, in American history. In 2024, we're at a very strange crossroads, because if I had seen this in 1997 when it came out, I would have thought, oh, certainly we're headed toward this sort of future. This was all the rage, talking about genetic engineering and picking out, the best traits from your parents and who would make a good father and who would make a good mother to make these perfect children. Not quite eugenics, but really bordering on that zone. We had unlocked the genetic code. Parents naturally want their children to have a leg up in life. This is also, remember when people started having the baby listening to music in the womb and eating certain foods. So there's no question in 97, I think people would have done anything to make sure their kid had those advantages. But now in 2024, there's this incredibly strong current of anti-intellectualism that I think counters that desire for your child to have everything. I don't know, as a legit question, I don't know if an America of today would embrace or reject a genetic database, right? I saw this as an inevitable future back in 97. Now, living in 2024, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. We're simultaneously in a society that has started doubting vaccines, but at the same time, they're perfectly willing to inject Ozempic. And I kind of wondered, as a parent, you personally, do you think that this is something you would do? But two, beyond that, do you think that America would ever do this under the current climate?
I think it depends. I think that's a really complicated question. I think we do have a genetic database and it's called ancestry.com, right? We have people who have no problem having their DNA cataloged and put out there. I think the problem is people by and large, and this I think is just in general with privacy of any kind, they just don't understand the implications of their information being cataloged in that way. For example, I've shared at length before about how my husband's an addict, and that follows him to every doctor because of the way that we catalog, medical records now. So he can't even be prescribed medication after a major surgery without going through an act of Congress because he's got this black mark, right? So I think we do have this in a lot of ways. I think also IVF has really changed people's perceptions regarding this. And please know, absolutely no judgment if you've had IVF to have children. I have lots of friends who went that route. But I think that, you can choose the gender of your baby that way. You can choose certain things about them. A question of whether or not I would do it, abso-fucking-lutely, I would. I don't know if I would participate to the length of eliminating different pieces that feel kind of icky to me in terms of eye color, hair color. I think a lot of that shit's really nice to be left up to fate, let's call it. But, eliminating the possibility that my children will not develop my anxiety disorder, absolutely, I would have prevented that. My son already has it, and it's fucking awful to watch my kid at 8 years old have panic attacks like I used to have at 8 because my genetics gave him that, right? I would love to engineer and make sure that, they don't have any of those huge issues that we've struggled with, but I don't know. I also understand the other side. So I think it's really, really complex, and I think it's personal. And absolutely, I think our society would be for it to the point that they didn't understand it, and also to the point that they weren't left off of that list, right? I think once you become the other person, you start to reject the tool that causes the othering, especially if you've never been a part of that group to begin with.
One of the fears I've always had when the notion of becoming a parent ever comes up is the fear that like I would have a kid that would be a disappointment, right? That would be a fuck up or that would struggle in life to be at all successful. And then, and I mentioned this on the pod before, and then I raised dogs and I realized that like no matter how big a failure they are, I don't really care because I just love them for what they are. Like their personalities, whatever. It just takes on such a different, I think, dimension, like you mentioned, with a human being, because they do need to succeed in life in order to have the things that they need. Like nothing comes for free. And also, like you said, knowing the things that you've struggled with, there is a certain notion of, I don't want to say guilt, maybe it is guilt, but a notion of responsibility when you see somebody struggling for something that you literally passed on to them.
Yeah, I mean, my son asked me the other day, he made a really big mistake about something, which for a kid, it was a big mistake. You know, he lied about using his phone, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, it was not that big of a deal. But for an 8-year-old, it was like his whole world was falling apart, right? And he asked me, he said, Mommy, do you want me to just not make mistakes? And I looked at him very, very honestly, and I said, absolutely not. I want you to make a ton of mistakes. I just don't want you to make the mistakes I made. Like, that's my only wish for you, is that you don't make mine. And I think that's where the guilt comes in, is when you see them struggle with the things that you know you literally genetically passed on to them.
And low-rise jeans.
And low-rise jeans, absolutely. And skirts. To the movie itself, if we talk about the style of this film, I have to be honest that this is one of those films, like I said, that like the details of it are very foggy for me. If I close my eyes and you ask me to picture Gattaca, I can absolutely picture what Gattaca looks like. I absolutely can tell you what the box looked like, what every scene in this movie looks like, what the pallor of the film looks like, all of that. It's like ingrained in my mind. But how the story actually progresses is very, very different. And one of the things I did not remember was the voiceover in this film. And it is heavy-handed. And it kind of just goes on like forever. And here's the thing. I don't mind voiceover in small doses. I really don't. And I think that voiceover is okay in certain films, especially if there's like a bookish connection to them, because then like you're transitioning like the novel into like the film world, and like it can be a device, even though it can be heavy-handed, right? But it can be a device. But here, was it necessary to have Ethan Hawke narrate the entirety of his backstory? Like, I so much wanted to be like, shut up, Ethan. Like, let us just watch what's going on film, because it's like 20 minutes of the whole thing. And I found the longer it lasted, the more off-putting it was.
Ash, as a Great Expectations fan, I figured you'd be really into Ethan Hawke voiceovers.
It's because it's literary. Like, I feel like it's like, oh, this was a book. Let me read it to you.
Yeah, oddly, I really liked the voiceover. As Rob mentioned, it gave it sort of this film noir feel. I felt like there was a Gatsby-esque quality about it, which really applies to nearly every aspect of this movie. But you're not wrong. Gattaca has a look, and that look is the dominant thing. It might be a case of style over substance. Like, even people who haven't seen Gattaca can spot Gattaca. It has a very distinct vision of the near future. You've got the, you know, that retro modern thing where like electric cars that look like they're from the 60s. Everybody's wearing double-breasted suits, and the appliance design is very mid-century. There's these huge, sparse, echoey spaces that people exist in. And not all this was necessary, but it was visually interesting. And I think this is something we see a lot with directorial debuts, right? They want to make a statement, show you their vision. And I appreciated those little nods we were getting from the rookie director, Andrew Niccol, including what I think might have been an Ophelia reference. Like, you see Vincent floating in the seaweed. I did not see that coming, about that idea of being othered or only existing in the opinions of others. And I said, okay, this guy's got a little panache. I like his swagger.
Clearly, he cut his teeth in art design or set design or cinematography, something of that nature, because it is beautiful. I mean, regardless of what we say about this film from here on out, the film is gorgeous, and you can't deny how pretty it is. And I love like the little like nostalgia piece, like you mentioned, about like the 60s kind of feel to it. You know, it's very Jetsons in that way, where like it feels like the future that we think we were going to have that never actually came to be but there's something kind of really cool about like a speakeasy in like the future. And that's what this film's kind of got about it. And I also love that it's clear that there's something atmospheric and environmental going on because of the fog and the smog and the haze and the whole movie is just yellow. I haven't seen a movie this yellow since I saw Magic Mike, where all the Tampa scenes are like super, super yellow and like orange. This movie has that kind of feel to it, unless you're in Gattaca when it's all blues and grays. And there's something really cool about that.
Years later, Vincent works cleaning office spaces at Gattaca Aerospace Corporation. He gets a chance to pose as a valid by using donated hair, skin, blood, and urine samples from the now paralyzed former swimming star Jerome Eugene Morrow. With Jerome's genetic makeup, Vincent gains employment at Gattaca and is assigned as a navigator for an upcoming mission to Saturn's moon, Titan. To conceal his identity, Vincent must meticulously groom and scrub down daily to remove his own genetic material, pass daily DNA scanning and urine tests using Jerome's samples, and hide his heart defect. So at this point in the movie, we've gone past Vincent's childhood and we really get into Bonerville, population us, because we've got a young Ethan Hawke. And as you mentioned, Ash, we've got a young Jude Law. I want to start with Ethan Hawke because in 1997, you have to remember, this is Ethan Hawke at 27 years old, like arguably his prime. And 27 is a really fun age for an actor because you can play people who are older, you can play people who are younger. You got a lot of range there just by the way they could dress you up, the accessories they could put on you, the haircuts and stuff. And I know I'm old, but to me, the difference between a 27-year-old and an 18-year-old, that can be masked. Like I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, especially in film, right? You got camera angles, you've got all sorts of options there. Yet for some reason, they have this in-between Vincent. It's not child Vincent and it's not Ethan Hawke Vincent. It's like the other Vincent right in between. They had to hire a totally different actor to play that tight window. The kid is so fucking stiff. And I'm like, why did they just put Ethan Hawke with a different haircut and call it a day?
Well, it's not just Vincent, it's Anton too, who is younger than Vincent.
Oh, yeah.
You just aged up the parents. It's not like you recast the parents as well now that they're in their 40s. Like, it made absolutely no sense. And I thought it was very strange. And maybe that's why he's doing the voiceover. Maybe in Ethan Hawke's contract, it was like, I have to be in this film for this percentage, and they recast me here, so I'm going to talk over the fucking dude because he's a bad actor.
You might be wondering how I got here to Gattaca.
Well, let me tell you. Sit down, sit back. Here's the story. It brings me to what I think is probably my biggest critique of this movie, and the thing that just constantly took me out of it. The whole movie hinges on this idea that Ethan Hawke can pass as Jerome Morrow. He can pass as Jude Law, and that they look alike, so he can pass as him. And here's the thing. Ethan Hawke, gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Jude Law, absolutely gorgeous. Both incredibly charismatic. But they fucking look nothing alike one another. And sure, Ethan Hawke gets a haircut and he does the little swoosh with his comb. He gets a pair of contact lenses. But they don't fix his teeth. They make him taller, but they don't adjust the proportions of his face. He just looks so little like Jude Law. And I get it, right? Like, I could have bought into it of like, we've got these two hot young actors, we want to include them. If every 10 minutes in the movie, they don't flash the ID that comes up with Jude Law's face. And it's like, here's Jerome. And it's like, that's fucking not Jerome.
Yeah, it's totally unnecessary. They do this weird, like, staticky thing every time the screen comes up to. It's like, and then it comes in. I don't know what that's all about. But yeah, easy solve. Don't have a picture.
Yes.
You don't need to have a picture. Just put the fucking name up there. It's fine.
Or put like a double helix. Put his DNA up there because that's what you're scanning.
And listeners, we're not stupid. Ash and I both read quite a bit. We get the idea. The film is making the point that once you're a valid, nobody actually sees you, right? Like, that's why there's so much uniformity in everyone's appearance and behavior. You see everybody else working at Gattaca. You don't know what anybody looks like except for essentially Vincent and Irene. And that's why Vincent doesn't have to interview for the job. When he's Jerome, they're just like, hey, you just passed your interview. That's it. But then the film contradicts itself, right? If he's going to undergo surgery to match a man's height, as you mentioned, Ash, maybe do the easy thing, change the teeth, alter the face. And also, it's not like he just picked some random fucking dude. This is an Olympian who was paralyzed in a traffic accident. Do people not have TVs anymore? Is there no newspaper? Nobody knows the tragic tale of Jerome Morrow and what he looks like?
And Jerome Morrow, who probably competed for England because he's British and he has his British accent. I truly expected that Ethan Hawke was going to go in and just like pull a British accent the whole time, but he doesn't. He keeps his English accent. He keeps his, kind of messed up teeth, which I think Ethan Hawke's teeth are like incredibly charming, but they're not Jude Law's teeth.
Maybe what happened in this movie is they just had way too much of a casting budget, because what they could have done is saved a lot of money by having Jude Law play both.
Yes.
Like, he changed his face and now it's just Jude Law doing everything.
Right. I mean, I was expecting a Mission Impossible moment. Like he just was going to pull off the mask at the end of every day, right? But speaking of Jude Law, all right, here's the thing, y'all out there. I know I get flack sometimes from the 3 reviewers who constantly post a 1-star review about me. Hello. That I talk about men too much on this podcast, because how dare I, as a woman, say that a man is attractive? I don't have the right to do that. But I would be markedly remiss if I don't piss those 3 people off and bring up how beautiful and like how absolute of a moment a young Jude Law was. Like, it was a moment in cinema that we were all blessed with, because there is something about him. Like, he looks like a Botticelli painting. I mean, he's just an exquisite human being at this age. He is clearly in his prime. He's about to go on to do, The Talented Mr. Ripley and all of these things that he is so exquisite in. And there's this quality about him that there's like a handful of actors. And I know this is going to sound like really reductive in a way, but like, they just look rich. They look like they've got fucking money. And if you want to know some other ones, Jacob Elordi, like, there's a reason he was cast in the role he was casted in Saltburn. He looks like he's got money. Eddie Redmayne looks like he's got money, because guess what? He does. And then there's Jude Law. Like, he just looks like he bleeds and seeps out old money when he's in a room. And he's perfectly cast in this. And even so, like, you can tell they try to kind of like dirty him up a bit. And they put this paint on him to make him look like he has dark circles under his eyes, because I guess you can't just be paralyzed and healthy in the future. You have to be paralyzed and like, look like a skeleton in the face with like dark circles because of the amount of alcohol he drinks for some reason. But like, even with the dark circle makeup, it's like, oh, well, that's a moment. Like, he looks better with the dark circle makeup. Like, the man is exquisite.
Jude Law is the kind of beautiful that allows a person to be a drunken asshole and insult you to your face, and you just don't care, because it feels so good just to look at them. Like, we've all met those people. We all know those people. He is one of those people. And beyond that, Ash, he's just really good at playing flawed characters. Like, he's never perfectly good, You could see the makings of his performance in AI a few years later. He's just dynamite in this film. And not to put down anybody else's performance in it either, but you're right. I would classify this as a moment for Jude Law.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I am very clear that, yes, he's beautiful, but he's also fantastic in this. Like, he plays this part so well where you can feel how disgusted he is with himself the entire film. And there's something really haunting in this movie about the most gorgeous person in this film hating himself. And the fact that, he is your anchor for the story that they're trying to tell, that even if you are genetically engineered, even if they try to make this recipe to give you every advantage, like fate and failure and those things still find human beings. It's part of the human experience that you can't genetically code out of you. And he's a really beautiful example of that. And without him, this movie does not work, because Ethan Hawke is great in it. But if you don't have Jude Law in those scenes at home, like juxtaposed to Vincent, who very much believes in himself, despite being a God-born, despite being all of that kind of thing, he very much has confidence that this gorgeous, genetically modified human basically does not have. And there's just this really amazing thing in scenes with them where he's in the chair and Ethan Hawke is standing next to him. Like, it does not work without Jude Law.
When a Gattaca administrator is murdered, the police find one of Vincent's eyelashes near the crime scene, but can only identify it as from an unregistered invalid. During the investigation, Vincent falls in love with a coworker, Irene Cassini. Though a valid, Irene has a higher risk of heart failure that will bar her from any deep space mission. Vincent also learns that Jerome threw himself in front of a car after winning silver at the Olympics. Jerome maintains that he is suffering because he was designed to be the best, yet somehow was not.
So the third person that makes our trio of actors in this movie is another person that is in their prime in the late 90s, and that is Uma Thurman. And I love Uma Thurman. I think she's amazing. I love her from Dangerous Liaisons all the way up through anything she's in with Tarantino, Pulp Fiction, all of those things, Kill Bill. I mean, I love her. I love Uma. And, this is sweet because this is when Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke are together. And this is when they're the most in love. And this is when they're going to, have their baby, little Maya Hawke, who I love, very soon. And, it really is like probably a great memory for them. And she's gorgeous. But she's not needed in this movie. She looks great in the world. She looks great in the color palette. She looks great with the cinematography. But is she needed for the plot? They do this thing where they try to make her Vincent's equal. Like, oh, she's modified, but it didn't work, right? And so they give her a heart condition. And she's supposed to look weak. But they're unable to do it because she just looks too pretty. She just looks too put together. And there's this scene where she has her dainty little heart moment where she hasn't taken her pills that day. And she is such a poor actor in a scene that Uma Thurman it's not her. She's typically really fantastic. But there's this weird flex that happens when she kind of goes limp and her hair's flying everywhere. And I don't know. I did not enjoy her in this movie because she felt like an add-on.
If you're in the casting department for a film and they say, we're making a movie where people choose the genetic traits of their children, and basically you're making these babies that grow up to be superhuman, essentially, Uma Thurman is the right choice. People forget what a specimen Uma Thurman is. It's almost like the camera actually doesn't do her justice, right? Aside from being beautiful, Uma Thurman is 5'11". She has enormous hands. She has incredible bone structure. She's like 140, 150 pounds. That is a substantial human being. And they really could have made her Vincent's genetic superior, which she is, and gone with less of a sympathy play. Why not a story between the two of them where she just actually loves him for him and he loves her for her, and she doesn't have to have this weak moment. But listen, they didn't. And I don't mind the poetry of the shared flaw. I think it's romantic, whatever. But I agree with you, Ash. It doesn't necessarily need to be her, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in this role.
But I think you just hit the nail on the head there, though, right? Is that I think that because this is a first-time director, I don't think he trusted himself enough to go with what would have been the better storyline. Because it would have been interesting if a valid fell in love with an invalid. That is a star-crossed lover type shit. Works every time. I think that would have been great because then that makes a point that she's choosing to be with someone whose genetic code is weak. And so that moment where she, grabs the hair and is like, oops, the wind caught it, which is charming. It's cute, right? But it would have meant so much more if she would have been not flawed and would have been choosing to be with him anyway. Because she wasn't, it's like they had to make it okay for the audience for the two of them to be together as well, which you don't need because Ethan Hawke is gorgeous. He's a specimen as well. It's not like we've got, fucking the new guy here, that scrawny little dude from early 2000s romantic comedies. Ethan Hawke is beautiful. So it makes sense that she would want to be with him, and she could have been with him for him rather than, well, our hearts are both weak, so we'll give them to one another.
You just know that in this world, there's totally a fetish for banging the Godborn. Oh man, yeah, I fucked the Godborn last night. Ugh. Oh, yeah. You dirty bitch.
What's your life expectancy? Let me know. If it's less than 20 years, you're mine, right? It's so gross. No.
But I'm kind of surprised that you weren't more taken in by this romance between Vincent and Irene. I was buying into it. There's that moment where they're hiding from the cops in the alley and Anton's yelling for Vincent. And she says, who's Vincent? And he's like, he's about to tell her. And then she says, oh, don't say anything. And they kiss, and it was a moment it was kind of hot. It conveyed a lot.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
It was about as sexy as when they went to a solar panel farm for their first date. That was super hot.
Also sexy waking up after sex, picking up all your hair and skin out of the bed, and then scrubbing yourself on the beach with pumice.
Don't you exfoliate after sex? I feel like it's pretty normal.
Yeah, but not voluntarily.
Fair.
While Vincent evades the investigation, it is revealed that Gattaca's mission director, Joseph, killed the administrator because he threatened to cancel the mission. The detective who closed the case was Vincent's brother, Anton, who discovered Vincent's presence. Anton warns Vincent about his illegal actions, but Vincent says he has gotten to his position on his own merits. Anton challenges Vincent to a final game of chicken. Vincent's stamina surprises Anton, so Vincent reveals he won by not saving energy for the swim back. Anton turns back and begins to drown, but Vincent swims them back to shore.
All right. We've got one final major character here, which is Anton. Anton, who is worthy of his father's name because his genetic code is clean. And let's recap by this point in the movie what we know as an audience about Anton. One, we know he's not a godchild. We know that he is what his parents decided. They made a mistake with Vincent by, not allowing him to have all of his, health issues kind of edited out. And so he's the preferred kid. Two, he's a decent cop. Like, he really is. Like, he figures out this crime. He doesn't believe the easy thing. He's clearly not prejudiced in the way that a lot of the Valids are, because even before he realizes that it's his brother, he doesn't automatically assume that the invalid is the one that's the criminal. And I like that about him. I like that his character was more nuanced and he wasn't just like a dick, because he dresses like a dick and he slicks his hair back like a dick, but he doesn't act like a dick, right? And the third is, like, clearly he's like hella nosy about his brother, and he's really lame for not letting his brother just like live his life, right? Like, I'm like, he's kind of a narc in that way, which makes sense because he's, your typical, cop character in these types of films where he's got a clear, black and white moral code. And so he just can't let his brother go. And the fourth thing that we know about him, which I'm going to argue is the unnecessary piece of this film, despite it taking, and I quote, 3 scenes. This happens 3 different times in this movie. Anton fucking sucks at swimming. And much like Uma Thurman, like, I feel like this is a strange plot point that is just like not needed, because Anton could have like not been Vincent's brother. He could have just been a cop. He could have just been someone that's there, because it requires so much coincidence for Anton to be the one that's called into Gattaca, and Anton to be the one that's clicking back and forth between the Vincent, Jerome, which is clearly Ethan Hawke, Jude Law, and not the same person, pictures, right? And this movie would not have been the worse for it. And I argue that you cut the swimming weirdness and you cut the foggy drowning scene, because Anton literally drowns 3 times in this movie and Vincent saves him. You cut that, and I think this movie would have been paced better.
I know it feels like we're rewriting the movie, but you're not wrong, Ash. And listeners, again, we're not stupid. Like, we get what they're trying to do. What you're trying to do and what you accomplish are very, very different, right? The notion here is the good son is conditioned to believe he's superior to his brother. They're showing you that with the parents, caring more about him after he was born. He's growing faster. His dad gives him his name, as you mentioned, Ash. But I've never seen siblings actually work out that way. That's not the way brothers work. Brothers invariably bond over their parents. They're closer to each other than they are their parents. And I wish that they'd explored Anton instead, loving Vincent deeply and the humanity that comes along with that, and also being better at swimming. But again, that's not the story they chose to tell. I respect it. It could have been better.
Well, and why is it that swimming is his superpower? It doesn't make sense. And why is it where swimming is as much of a cardiac output type of exercise as running? Why can he swim and swim and swim and not collapse into the lockers the way that he does after running? Again, I think it's a first director issue where a plot point that he puts in there, it's like, you mentioned A Brave New World, and I'm going to get to it at the end in terms of my wipe review. A Brave New World is one of my favorite books ever. And clearly that's the inspiration for this film. But A Brave New World is so much more subtle in its approach to things. And I think this is indicative of what a lot of things that Hollywood does sometimes with great literary works, where it feels like they take a really complex text And then they take the cliff notes, and they don't just take the cliff notes. They go to like the box in the cliff notes that defines the theme. That's like a paragraph. And that's what they use to write the movie. And they're losing like all the complexity. It's like they don't trust that the audience is smart enough to figure it out. So it's like, oh, hey, here's our big heavy-handed lesson here that Vincent may be a godborn, but he's better because he can breaststroke better than his brother. And it's just so heavy-handed.
Now, Ash, she's taken us through most of the cast, which is something that we don't normally do on the podcast, but hey, this is where the movie's taking us. My favorite performance, if I may add one more on there, was Alan Arkin. Alan Arkin's always good. We should just acknowledge that. But he plays the subordinate detective who's frustrated as hell by all the obstruction. Like, he just wants to close the fucking case, right? It made me think of the fucking insanity that is Gattaca casting. They went crazy in this movie, okay? Never in all the movies I've watched in all my life have I paused the movie more times and yelled, "Is that?" and then looked it up. Is that Monk? Yup. Tony Shalhoub is in this movie as German. Is that fucking Hank from Breaking Bad? Absolutely. Is that pro volleyballer Gabby Reese playing the treadmill police? It was. I was on a fucking roll spotting people. And by far, the craziest casting was the lab tech behind the window analyzing the sample from Irene. That is Ken Marino from The State, and I recognized him based on his reflection in a blue plate of glass. And he is totally doing his Louis face. Like, I was expecting him to yell out, like, "I want to dip my balls in it." Who the hell picked these people out? It's genius.
It is. I got to tell you, the secondary characters were fantastic. And it was so much so that every time like you saw Ethan Hawke working at his little like circular workstation, typing away on doing the, flight plan to Titan 20 different times. That's apparently the only thing Vincent's allowed to work on is the same flight plan over and over and over again. But I kept looking in the background, like trying to catch if there was any other like fantastic casting, because it's pretty spot on.
Well, on the day of the launch, Jerome reveals that he has stored enough DNA samples for Vincent to last 2 lifetimes upon his return and gives him an envelope to open once in flight. Vincent prepares to board, but discovers there is a final genetic test, and he currently lacks any of Jerome's samples. Dr. Lamar, who oversees background checks, reveals that he knows Vincent has been posing as a valid. He changes the test results, allowing Vincent to pass. As the rocket launches, Jerome dons his swimming medal and immolates himself in his home's incinerator. Vincent opens the note to find a lock of Jerome's hair.
I appreciate, Gene Lyons, that you brought up in the very first bucket of notes here about, is this movie more style than substance? And in this last piece of our review, I would argue yes. And I want to give one example that I think is a perfect anecdote that proves my point heartily. And that is the way they go to space. I know what you're thinking out there, dear listeners. People go to space in spacesuits. These people go to space in pinstripe suits. And it's so ridiculous. Like, it's so self-gratifying in this weird way of like, look at us, look how cool we are. Like, it's very much the moment that you can see that they've chosen, I think, style over substance, because I think this movie, as I've said ad nauseum throughout this review, I think it is gorgeous. I think it is a vibe, and it is a vibe that I'm like down with. I think it's fantastic. I think this movie would make a beautiful graphic novel. I think it would make a beautiful short. I understand why they explored it for a television show, because I think exploring the world and those other sub characters and all of that would be really beautifully done. But as a feature-length film, some of the choices they make are weird, like the weird gyrating, like woo-woo things that the astronauts are on in the background on the treadmills, the way they all run the same, the uniforms that they wear. Like, there's just a lot of choices that are made of like, look at us, look at us, look at how cool we are. And when he has his hair perfectly, fixed. He's got that stern look. He has his arms behind his back. He follows a laughable line of like clone-like people in pinstripe suits into the spaceship, sits down and just closes his eyes with all that hair gel in his hair. And he takes off for Titan. It really wasn't like the cool vibe I think they were going for. Like in that moment, it's like, you can't go to space like that.
Ash, when I saw them shuffling through that portal in their suits, I said, oh shit, this is where we get the plot twist. This is where we get some weird, like, Logan's Run, Flowers for Algernon twist. The whole thing must be an elaborate scheme to dispose of the genetic outliers who are too perfect.
God.
They've ruined the performance curve. Like, we can't have them in our world. And so they just, kill them some way. Like, the rockets are fake. And these people are just being incinerated or turned into food or harvested for like their genetic material to make babies or something. No, they're actually on a rocket, and there they go.
That would have been horrible. That would have been, that they made that movie, and it's called The Island with Scarlett Johansson and Ewan McGregor. That's that movie. And it's not great, right? I'm glad that didn't happen. But instead, you had the plot twist that was telegraphed from the very beginning. Like the first time the doctor makes a comment about his dick when he's peeing, I said, oh, the doctor knows. Like he knows. And then, of course, what's the big red herring? The way he holds his dick. Like that literally is the end. And yes, it's sweet. It's sweet that the doctor has a son that, looks up to Vincent Jerome, because he isn't what the doctors told him he would be and his genetic code isn't flawless and all. I mean, that's all fine, but that was enough plot twist. They would have had to telegraph it from the beginning, Soylent Green is people, right?
They still should have shown that dong.
Yeah, it would have made for a better film. Although it probably would have been like weirdly lit and have like its own little pinstripe suit because it's Gattaca. It's its own little dick suit. Double-breasted. And speaking of obvious plot points, the second they told us that Jude Law threw himself in front of the car and that's how he got put in the chair, I mean, it's clear that obvious Jerome's going to kill himself by the end of the film. And I did not mind that plot point being obvious. Like, I think that was fine. And I get it. I get why Jerome wants to die. I get he's suicidal. But why the incinerator, Jerome? I think burning to death sounds horrendous. It sounds awful. I think the two worst ways I can think of to die are burning to death, drowning, and being crushed by rocks. I think all three of those things would be terrible. And he chose one of those three. He gets in the incinerator and I don't understand it. You're rich, Jerome. Buy some designer drugs. Why couldn't you wheel yourself out in front of another car? Something other than this, because that just feels like a horrible way to go.
All right, when Jerome reveals his failed suicide attempt to Vincent, he says, I couldn't even get that right. He's so down on himself. He feels like such a failure after not winning at the Olympics. So I think the idea is that he wanted to be absolutely certain it worked this time. And it's pretty hard to survive being in an incinerator when there's no one around to rescue you. And you're right, Ash. This was the logical progression, right? He was very clear that he needed Vincent's dream, and he was only hanging on because of Vincent's dream. And once that was done, he was done. But then I started thinking, dude, what if you put yourself in an incinerator and it fails? What if you put it in there and it has some weird thing where it detects there's a human and it stops, right? You're going to be hurting. That's going to suck. You got to make sure it works. And you're right. He's got the money. I bet Tony Shalhoub would have come over and done the job for $50.
Yeah.
Popped one in his brain and he's done.
Well, and there's this weird moment where they zoom in through the flames to his silver medal. And one, I get it. It's oh, he's dying. I guess he's proud of his accomplishment, but still feels like a failure. So he has to die. And I get the point they're trying to make. But all in my head is what's the physics of this incinerator? How does it work? What is it? Because you can see his clothing and you can see his chest and you can see that nothing's actually burned.
That's the thing is I thought this was going to be some sort of a futuristic vaporizer machine, So it's just you hit the button poof, and everything's done. No.
Yeah.
It's a wood burning stove.
Right.
It's going to be a minute, Jerome.
It's a fucking fire starter. It's going to burn from both ends and then come to the middle. And here's the thing, guys. Dude's not that paralyzed. It's not like he's going to be sitting there not shaking or screaming from the flames that are strangely avoiding his double-breasted suit and his metal.
And on that note, Rob, it's time to give our Shat score for Gattaca. The Shat score is our way of telling you how many wipes this movie takes to get respected. But Zero Wipes is a perfect movie. It's a world where everyone speaks Esperanto. And 5 Wipes is an absolute disaster of a film. It's when you lend someone your body and they lend you their dream. Ash, we'll start with you. What is your wipe score for Gattaca?
Okay. I get why I loved this movie growing up. And I still dig this movie in a lot of ways, right? I really do. But objectively, I don't think it's a great movie in terms of like what a movie is. Because let's ask ourselves that. I think maybe that's the important question to start with is what is a movie? Is it the cinematography? Is it the visuals? Is it the dialogue? Is it the plot? Or is it an amalgam of all of those things? And I would argue it's the combination of all of those things. And this movie, if we're just looking at set design, if we're just looking at art design or sound design, I think this movie's perfect. It's flawless. Much like Blade Runner, though, and the reason why it gets a lot of flack, which I think Blade Runner is a better film than this, but they're both sci-fi. And so I think it makes sense to compare them here. Much like Blade Runner, it's more visually stimulating than it is orally, like auditorially. Like it's eye candy as opposed to the story itself. And while Blade Runner has a better script, and that final scene of Blade Runner, I think is one of the most perfect film scenes ever shot, and this movie doesn't have that, they're similar in that way. And I think that I just couldn't disconnect it with A Brave New World. I just couldn't. The book is so much better in all ways in this movie. And one of my very favorite quotes of all time comes from A Brave New World, which is, "One believes things because one has been conditioned to believe them." And that clearly is the line that they took and created a movie and ran with this film. The problem was they didn't delve as deep as A Brave New World does. And granted, they have hundreds of pages to do that in the novel. And they just spent their time in this film with swimming, drowning scenes and Uma Thurman plot points and, things like that, where they could have really explored morality and a core morality that I think the movie lacks. So I originally was going to give it 3.5 wipes, but I've really enjoyed like dissecting it with you. And so I'm going to go a little bit kinder. I'm going to say it is worse than average still, but it's a 3-wipe film for me.
All right. 3 wipes from Ash. Ash, I agree with all of your points. I totally see where you're coming from. I think the difference is that unlike Blade Runner, which I think is visually superior to this, I mean, they really created a world and a way of looking at things. This was still somewhat derivative. I mean, Gattaca is very clearly Gattaca, but we've sort of seen this sort of thing before by 1997. It's tighter. It's a little less self-indulgent, I think, than Ridley Scott tends to get. And the big thing is I'm a sucker for archetypes. And this is a story told through archetypes, which leads us to a lack of nuance. Some things may feel a little heavy-handed, but that's the way film is when it leans heavily into archetypes and to try to tell its story. So I think it's an above-average film. It certainly is flawed in all the ways that you mentioned. And so I'm going to come in at 1.5 wipes for this one. And with 3 wipes from Ash and 1.5 wipes from me, that gives us an average wipe score of 2.25 wipes for Gattaca. This ties Gattaca for the 159 position at Shat the Movies with True Romance, Clerks, The Final Countdown, and Liar Liar. It is better than Point Break and Casino, and not quite as good as Arthur or Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
I mean, I think that's definitely a weird place to find it, but I do think that I think that it's as good as some of those movies. I think True Romance is better than this overall as a movie.
I agree with that.
But I like the score. I think that you balanced out my harshness. I think it being there right around average makes sense.
True Romance was unfortunately weighed down a ton by Roger Roper, who gave it 4 wipes.
Which is insane. True Romance is such a great movie.
Congratulations, Raj. Moving right along, we've got time for some voicemail and email. And our first voicemail, Chris from New Jersey, who's calling in about Hellraiser.
Hey, Shat Crew, how are you? This is Chris from New Jersey. Just wanted a quick check-in and say hello. Hey, Gene, I hope you're having a great wedding. I imagine that at this point it's happening. Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
Whoa.
Hellraiser. Just listen to that podcast. Had a blast watching it. And I'm not big into horror, but there's a few that obviously I do enjoy. And pretty much most of the big mainstream ones. But I have seen, I think, 3 of the Hellraisers. And what's entertaining about them more than anything is just the brutal dialogue of Pinhead, which always makes me laugh. My friends and I love it. There's actually a compilation. You guys go to YouTube and just type in, Pinhead best lines. There's a great 3-minute video of just all his best lines, and the best one obviously is in the first Hellraiser. No tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering. He's got a bunch of other good ones too. He just has such gravitas, as you guys have touched on, in your episode here. And Doug Bradley just does a great job inhabiting that character. But I also want to mention, Big D, you had talked about going to urban theaters to see movies and how much fun the audiences can be. Oh my God, I have to echo that statement. I mean, I remember opening night of Devil's Advocate, which obviously you guys have covered. The scene where Charlize Theron is in the dressing room with the African American actress, who, when she looks at her at one point, looks like a demon. The guy behind me yells loud, "I was trying to see some titties, and all of a sudden I'm seeing creature feature." The theater just erupted in laughter.
He's sitting next to Rodney Dangerfield.
Another one was great. Transporter 2, opening night. There's a scene where Jason Statham's in the middle of a road. There's 2 cars coming towards him, one in each direction towards him. And then just as you think they're both going to smash into him, he jumps up into the air and he lands 1 foot on each hood of each car as the 2 cars hit each other. The guy behind me yells, "Bullshit!" We all cracked up. They're just the best. I went to the city to see a screening of Superfly. If you guys have ever seen Superfly, oh my God, we were the only white guys in the theater, and we had a blast. Oh my God, it's just great. There's nothing better than seeing a bad movie with a lively audience. It's so great. But anyway, yeah, I appreciate you guys touching on Hellraiser. It was the first one really did a lot with its minimal budget, like you guys have said, and it's just, I remember that movie stayed with me. I watched that, I think, when I was in middle school for the first time. And I never forgot those visuals and just the unsettling nature of just being stuck in that claustrophobic attic with that bloody mess of flesh. But yeah, so that's that. And I just want to send this. I'm not going to linger long on here. And thanks again, guys. Always enjoy the podcast. Keep doing it.
So I wasn't on the Hellraiser pod, but I love Hellraiser. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. And right there with you, I remember seeing it when I guess I was in junior high the first time I saw it. And I fucking thought it was badass. And I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of the 2022 Hellraiser film as well, where they completely redid Pinhead. Jamie Clayton, who I absolutely love from Sense8. She plays Nomi Marks in Sense8, one of my favorite sci-fi shows of all time. She plays Pinhead, and she's fucking amazing as Pinhead.
Chris, I just wanted to commend you on the fact that your reference to urban audiences, and assuming by urban audiences, you're using the term the same way that Big D and I do, which is black people. Yeah, black people in New Jersey apparently all sound like Rodney Dangerfield, which is absolutely hilarious. But no, I totally agree. I mean, we've talked about it before on the podcast, and this is not like a generalization of an entire group of people, but rather that just like I can say this about Iranians as well, is it's just there is more verbal response to film culturally that is acceptable. When I watch movies with my family, they're talking the whole damn time and they scream and they laugh and they talk to the people on screen, and it's just a different film experience. And again, it's not to say that all Iranians or all black people experience film in the same way, but it is culturally common. And one of my favorite things about when I lived in the Bay Area and saw movies out there as well, the movie experience is very different than it is in Arizona.
Yeah, movie experiences are very different here than they were in New Orleans. I mean, I had an experience much like you're talking about the first time I saw The Ring. It's one of my favorite movie stories of all time where, come on, we all forget that the end of The Ring was a huge fucking surprise when it happened the first time. And the guy next to me, big dude, man, he started screaming. He was so scared. He was not being a dick. He was fucking terrified, and he kept screaming, no, you freaky white bitch, get back in the TV, go back in the TV, freaky white bitch. And he grabbed me, and the dude had to weigh 300 pounds, and he wound up almost halfway in my lap by the time she was all the way out of the TV. I just cracked up the whole time. I couldn't stop laughing. It was one of my, it was great. There's nothing better than seeing a film live with a huge audience that's really into it.
Little did he know the freaky white bitch was in the seat right next to him.
You're welcome.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for your voicemail. Next up, we have one from Hot Sauce Steve, and he's calling in about Dodgeball and Zoolander.
Hey, Shat Crew, it's Hot Sauce Steve. So thank you for letting me commission the unrated edition of Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Because I also commissioned Happy Gilmore, what feels like years ago, probably was years ago, I should also commission Billy Madison. So I will soon be commissioning Billy Madison as well. And in the future, if I can also do Dodgeball and Zoolander, some of the best comedies ever made, I will also gladly commission Zoolander and Dodgeball as well. Let me know about those. I know Sarah Marshall was iffy, but I saw Eternal Sunshine in 2004, so I thought I could get Sarah Marshall in, and I did. So let me know about Dodgeball and Zoolander. Have a great day.
Oh, Hot Sauce Steve. I have so many things to say. So the first is, I fucking love Billy Madison. Billy Madison is one of my favorite comedies of all time. That is a movie that if you put me on the spot and you said, I'll give you $1 million if you can quote every word from that film, I may just earn that $1 million because I was obsessed with that film. Dodgeball? We go from Billy Madison to Dodgeball? Oh, Hot Sauce Steve.
I think it's a testament to how much Ash actually loves Billy Madison, where she didn't even get defensive about Eternal Sunshine and Dodgeball being mentioned in the same breath. But Hot Sauce Steve, we're ultimately going to leave this up to Big D as far as whether we do these movies. Listen, we're the talent. We're not the money people. And so if he's willing to do it, we're willing to do it. But I think you've been in touch with them, so hopefully we get that on the schedule. But hey, if you've got opinions on Dodgeball and Zoolander, go to shatpod.com, leave us a voicemail using the SpeakPipe feature.
And I just want to remind everybody, the reason why he gets to make those decisions is, as we learned a couple weeks ago, Big D is the reason this podcast is held together. So he's the glue.
That's absolutely right. Thanks for calling in, Hot Sauce Steve. Moving on, we have an email from Quiggy, who's writing in about Xanadu.
When Quiggy says, Shat Crew. Okay, first off, I only recently discovered your podcast about 3 months ago. Listening at 1.2 to 1.5 play speed to catch up, I'm still only up to episode 150, but I'm gradually getting there. I keep hearing about commissions on the podcast. I have become interested in doing this, but unfortunately, every time I come up with a title, it's one you've already done. My favorite movies, Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, Big Trouble in Little China, and American Werewolf in London have already been done, and yes, I have listened to those episodes. I wanted my choice to be either a movie I truly loved or truly hated, so I could see how your ratings on opinions matched with mine. In listening to the vast volume of episodes I've heard so far, I kept hearing you say that no amount of commission would induce you to do some movies. Call me cheap, but if I were to invest in a commission, I would not want to pay to find out that you refuse to do it. But as I look through the catalog, one movie seems to be one of the most obvious choices, and I can only assume that it may be the one that is in the category of unacceptable. And that movie is Xanadu. I have some definite mixed feelings about and memories of this flick. So would you consider it if I commission it? Thanks, Quiggy.
Quiggy, first of all, thank you so much for listening. And for those of you who wonder if we've done a movie, do what Quiggy did and actually search it out. So you can go to shatpod.com and you can search there to see if we've done the movie. You can search wherever you find your podcast, like say on Apple Podcasts. But Quiggy's done Quiggy's homework, and Quiggy knows that we have not done Xanadu. And I think Xanadu is a wonderful idea because I grew up with that movie and I've got some feelings about it.
I think we definitely should do Xanadu.
And Quiggy, just to clarify, we would never take a commission for a movie and not do it. So basically, if we take your money, you're getting your podcast. It might not be this week or this month or this year, but eventually we will get to it. So there is a bit of a backlog. You can check that schedule out on shatpod.com as well. But hopefully by the time you're caught up, we can do your movie.
I also just want to know what we sound like at 1.4 speed.
I know that at half speed, we sound drunk.
Huh. Well,
yeah.
We also sound drunk a lot of the time at regular speed. So.
Because we're drunk.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Quiggy, thank you so much for writing in. Again, if you'd like to write us at hosts@shatpod.com. We'd love to hear from you. And you can always go to shatpod.com and use the SpeakPipe feature. Ash, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, Gene, next week, a restless teenager, Billie Jean Davy, and her brother Binks dream of leaving oppressive Corpus Christi, Texas for Vermont. When Binks' scooter is trashed by bully Hubie Pyatt, Billie Jean goes to ask Hubie's father for $608 for repairs, only to have Mr. Pyatt try to rape her. Jesus, that took a fucking turn.
I didn't see that coming.
Oh my God. Oh, I made my thing fall. My handheld windscreen came down. The rape made it go away. Okay.
I just like that you went from like laughing about this $608 to rape.
What do you mean? Like, it comes out of fucking nowhere, man. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like we spoil the movie for everybody.
Jesus. Billie Jean. I can't do it. Okay. I'm going to hold it.
Yeah.
Okay. Billie Jean goes to... It's so unprofessional. I'm so sorry.
Hubie.
Okay. I mean, his name's fucking Hubie. All right. As she flees, Binks finds Mr. Pyatt's gun and unintentionally shoots Okay. As she flees, Binks finds Mr. Pyatt's gun and unintentionally shoots him. Billie Jean and her brother go on the run, becoming folk heroes. I cannot wait for this episode. Okay. As she flees, Binks finds Mr. Pyatt's gun and unintentionally shoots him. Billie Jean and her brother go on the run, becoming folk heroes in the process. And this was commissioned by Brienne M. It was released July 19th, 1985, directed by Matthew Robbins. And man, I gotta tell you, after that description, I am looking forward to this one.
Oddly enough, it's based on Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Well, thank you, Brienne, for commissioning our upcoming film. Thank you to Rob for commissioning Gattaca, and thank you to all our commissioners who make this podcast possible. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share it with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. Email us, host@shatpod.com. Support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, buying our merch, or by commissioning your own movie. Find all information by visiting our website, shatpod.com. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV. Review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Find all information on our website, shatpod.com/TV. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Ash and Big D, I'm Gene Lyons. Join us next week for the following movie.
She was a fugitive to the police. A sensation to the media, and a symbol of courage to young people everywhere to fight for what's right.
Where is she? Everywhere.
The Legend of Billie Jean, directed by Matthew Robbins, featuring Pat Benatar's hit song Invincible, rated PG-13. Starts Friday at a theater near you.